So the thing about education that got me started, and I've told people this from time to time, when I was in law school, I took a class on the Constitutional Convention, where we read the notes of the Constitutional Convention, and at the end of the course, people did various research projects. The project that has stuck with me and literally influenced my life was someone who talked about how in the early part of this country, anybody could go west, they could get a plot of land and homestead, set up their own place, and by that measure, each man, each woman could be equal as a property owner. And that now that's no longer here. And what has supplanted that is the ability for each child to have a free public education. And because of that, I've dedicated just so much time of my life to help children be able to access a quality, free public education so that every child, regardless of their means, has the opportunity to succeed. It's what's most important to me.
Yes. Well, also the curriculum has changed substantially. I'm thinking again of my generation, which was many, many, many years ago. But I'm thinking back at the small school that I went to, and the things that we learned, which were things that every child should know. Mm-hmm. You know, English, the language, mathematics. We called it arithmetic. I mean,
sure.
It's really simple. And but these topics we all learned them. Mm-hmm. We all had equal access to it in mm-hmm. our little town, and it was great. We didn't have, I mean, there were kids that I didn't know that went to prep schools and private schools that I learned about later when I got into high school and after that, but this was our world, and it was simple, straightforward, and it seemed to have prepared me, I feel, for my mm-hmm. life. And but now the curriculum is just so different. I mean, I'm not saying it shouldn't change, but there's less personal contact between kids and their teachers and between kids. Do you feel that, or do you have a different?
No, I don't feel that there's less contact between children and their teachers, and education still does boil down to those basic English, math, history, science, social studies. They still have music, they still have gym, they still have art, and supporting arts is very important because what we know about how it impacts on brain development, supporting music also, how it impacts brain development. I think the biggest difference has been in the addition of technology to the educational process, not only in terms of teaching about it, but as a tool for children to use in learning, so that when schools are unable to deliver curriculum, that we can now use technology as a means of delivering that for them. Or whereas you and I would have only had the option of taking notes in pen and paper, students can now do that electronically. Tests mm-hmm. now happen electronically, and sometimes with a more rapid feedback on the data, or greater ability to distill information from the data across a larger group of students. So I see that as being the largest area of change. I think the pendulum swings back and forth in terms of how much focus there is on testing, how much structure we put into the curriculum, as opposed to how much we allow teachers individual room for creativity within their classrooms. And creative teachers just bring so much to the classroom. I think of, we had mm-hmm. a teacher, a Latin teacher in Litchfield who was fabulous, who would, he'd bring his guitar, and it seems to me you add music to anything and it becomes more memorable, and it was really effective for his class. He would bring props, really effective for his class, and the Latin program just bloomed under him because a foreign language somehow became more accessible through all those other means of delivering it. So yeah, I think the basics are all still there, embedded, but the piece that the other piece besides technology that strikes me is just the speed at which we expect children to learn, how early we bring that on, and how little time there is for play. Yes. And play is so important for learning. And that's something that concerns me, although I understand the importance of preschool and early childhood education. There's so much education that also happens just by the, unstructured experience of the world.
Yes, I agree that is important, and there's less of that now. And for the children to experience the out of doors and learn about nature and all of those factors that affect the environment and them. Well, it depends on where you are, I suppose, too. I think Litchfield is fortunate. I think they have a good school system, wonderful teachers. My 2 kids went through the school system and did very well. And yet other towns in the state of Connecticut have big problems, especially the urban areas where there's poverty and there's inequality among one school after another, and the kids are not getting the background and they're dropping out, and we know all those stories that are, it would be wonderful, but I think that public school is very important, and there seems to be a trend of people talking about people should have choice in schools, and I'm saying, how do you do that? How does a parent decide which school they want their child to go to? Unless, if you're a very well-informed parent, maybe you can do that. But the average person, to research that and visit the schools and take the time, I mean, each school should be as equal as possible in what they offer the children. And the public sector, I think, is where this should come from. The teachers are marvelous, and I really admire them, and I think they should be revered and held very high, and I guess they are. It depends again on the community, but I think they should have a well-paying, secure job.
I don't disagree with you on that.
Lots of money. Give teachers more money than because they do a lot of work.
Well, they're in charge of the majority of our children's structured waking hours. I mean, they help shape those lives, and they are invaluable. And I think we're very fortunate throughout the 66th district, because I think there are good schools throughout.
Yes.
And people have had to get creative in the district. So in Warren and Morris, as their elementary schools have gotten smaller, they now have multi-age classrooms, and I understand that those children are also doing very well. One of the issues I think that you alluded to is the issues with the funding for the schools and how to provide equality for students both in the rural areas, the suburban areas, and the urban areas, because there are differences. And that's part of what was previously handled through the ECS funding, educational cost sharing funding, which was recently taken to task by a Superior Court judge who has requested that the legislature address that. Actually within the next 6 months is what the court ordered. It is on appeal now, but I do think he was right, because I do think that the level of unpredictability in those budgets was very, very difficult. So the ECS funding, there was a formula which was never fully funded. And then when they funded it, for example, this past year, they funded that at 76%. But towns got different amounts of that. So you would think if you're going to fund something at 76%, every town would get 76%. But that's not the way it went. So Woodbury has historically only gotten about 30-some-odd% of their ECS funding, losing millions a year. In past years, Morris had gotten over 500% of its ECS funding. This year they got cut back to 108%, but that 108% resulted in a $500,000 loss to their budget. That loss to their budget has left them trying to close a budget gap that they were wholly unprepared for. So there needs to be something done to give towns predictability so that they can budget and plan. Each of us knows what our income is for the most part each month if we're a W-2 employee. We're planful, we know what our expenses are, and then we hopefully have enough put aside for the rainy day when the water heater goes. And I think towns need to have a similar level of predictability in their budgets so that they can be planful for whether it's paving roads, fixing bridges, funding their schools, you know, paying for their police force or their ambulance or fire trucks, whatever it is that needs to be done.
What determines the variability? Like you're saying, some schools get 500%, others get 100%, others get cuts. Who decides that? How does that?
Legislative committee. And that's, I think, in part why the court had decided in the recent case that the formula that schools were not being funded equitably, and therefore a new formula needed to be come up with so that there was that predictability.
So the town budget also affects the educational system of the school, right?
Absolutely.
Because the money goes to the town, and then if the money comes from the state, money to run the schools. Tell us about, just briefly.
Very briefly. It comes from three sources primarily. It comes from the federal government. It comes from the state government in forms of educational cost sharing or money for special education. And then it comes from the local taxpayers when they pay their taxes through their property taxes, mill rates and so forth. So there's three sources. And then what happens is the money that gets rebated to the school, like the ECS money, actually doesn't get paid to the school. It gets paid to the town.
The town. I see. So your role in the Board of Education has brought you a lot of information about how the schools are run, what the whole system is all about. And what is your specific role again in the Board of Education?
I've been the chair of the policy committee for the preceding 9 years, which means that we write the policies that the school utilizes in guiding its decision making, whether anything from mandated reporting for sexual abuse to we just did one on drones, unmanned vehicles, and whether they're allowed, to dress codes. All of that is policy. And that's the committee that I've chaired and I enjoy. And I feel like that's a natural translation for me to a legislative role, because really what it is about writing and crafting. The policy is the law of the school, and the legislature writes the laws for the state. So I feel like there's a natural translation there from one to the other. And in writing policy, you're reviewing legislation, because a lot of what you do is responsive to laws that have been passed, whether it's a federal law like No Child Left Behind, or a state law on whether you have defibrillators in the school. So it's reading it, it's processing it, and it's making it now part of the school policy. So I feel like it's a natural translation. And of course, as a lawyer, I read law.
Yes.
I write briefs.